was actually born in Europe. I was born in the Czech Republic, and into a musical family. My mother was an opera singer, and then after the Russian invasion in 1968, my parents fled the country and settled in South Africa, mainly because of the gold mining here. My father was a miner. He was a senior mine manager in one of the mines in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, and he wanted to come to South Africa because of the mining. So that's how I ended up here. But I grew up on the mine fields in South Africa, the gold mine fields, and not really realizing how that would affect and influence my perception and thinking about the world around us. Because what I didn't know growing up in the mine fields and the gold mines was that the circumstances that prevailed during the 60s and 70s and sort of into the mid-80s on the gold mines in South Africa, actually probably from the 50s already, were probably very similar to, in many ways, to the situation that must have prevailed in the ancient gold mines of the vanished civilizations of Southern Africa. But I'll come back to that later.
That's ironic because that's the work you're doing now.
Yeah,
you know,
as crazy as it may sound to some people, it's incredible the similarities that you start finding. So I left school. I was always involved in music and the arts and culture and so forth. Always outside the box, but enjoyed school. I was never a loner or an outsider. Very much a game player. I played sports. I participated in all the things, and school came easy to me. I passed with great ease. I didn't have to do any work. I'd always pass exams with good marks and distinctions, and so I was fortunate in that sense. And then I left school. I went to university, and I started studying chemical engineering. Which I didn't really enjoy, not because of the subject matter, because of the lecturers. The lecturers they just sucked at this university that I was at, and I switched from chemical engineering to pharmaceutics, from Pretoria to Johannesburg, and that was an interesting shift. That taught me about pharmaceutics, how drugs are manufactured. Pretty much do the same subjects at medical school that everyone that studies medicine and dentistry does. You all do the same subjects for the first 3 years, and then it starts to specialize into more specialist subjects of the various platforms or choices. So I realized at that stage that something was quite not right with the story that we're being told about humanity, our origins, the genetic code, how it all fits together. And it was also at that time, at the age of 18, that I read Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. And that was really the trigger point for me, I guess, at the age of 18.
Although so that was when you started getting interested in truth and stuff like that, looking behind the curtain?
Yeah, so it was about 1978,
okay.
78, 79. And that was, once you go through that door, there's no stopping, no turning back, as you know.
I agree. Yes.
And it's a beautiful journey with stops and starts. Sometimes you get distracted. I got involved in the music music industry and stage and TV and recording albums and so forth. And eventually I ended up living in Los Angeles for a year, trying to get into the music business there. I did very well until they found out that my partner and I were two white South African boys, at which stage all the record companies that had shown interest in us had dropped us like hot potatoes.
Wow.
Because it was just at
That's not too marketable, huh?
Yeah, no, that was just an interesting twist of fate, because while I was in LA trying to get signed and getting all the attention, and then suddenly being dropped, some of my black South African musician friends were in LA getting wine and dined by the big record labels because they were black, and because we were white, we were dropped. And there was an interesting reversal of fortune, although I obviously come from a background of, I guess, radical alternative thinking and always going against the thread. So I was always up against the apartheid regime throughout my childhood, and always an activist for human rights and so forth. So it's been with me for years and years and years.
Yeah, and that's, you know, a lot of people when they hear the word, you know, slave, they immediately think, you know, the black, the Africans and so forth, and it's not that. I know in researching it myself and the subject, you know, and then my own DNA and going back over the last 3,000 to 5,000 years is we've all been subjects to slavery and these atrocities and so forth. All the races across the world have been enslaved, and it's a lot of people, they hear that word and they think that when they're not educated on that. Do you agree, Michael, sometimes?
Well, not only that, I don't only agree with you, but I must make a very strong statement here, and I really wish and I hope that people take this and go and think about this and research this. And this is what I will tell you and your listeners. We are more enslaved now than at any other time in human history. Now, that might not make sense to people that are new to the subject matter, but once you get a hold of my new book, the Ubuntu Contributionism book that I've just completed, I'm just doing the 3rd or 4th edit now. It should be out hopefully by the end of April or during May. We are more enslaved now than ever before because the slavery is so carefully crafted and maliciously manipulated around us that we don't realize it. And it's that awakening that really gets a lot of people off their backside and start becoming activists for true liberation of humanity, the true liberation of our consciousness and true liberation of living, breathing human beings from the draconian enslavement of every government on this planet that enslave their people in ways that they cannot even begin to imagine. And the most important tool of enslavement, which we're going to come back to later, I guess, or in another program, is money. Money is the primary tool of enslavement on our planet today. And I know that I might be jumping around because we're supposed to be talking about origins of humankind and ancient civilizations, but unfortunately, and very excitingly as well, this is how beautiful this storyline is. It takes us from the origins of humankind, genetic manipulation, slaves in gold mines in southern Africa 300,000 years ago, the evolution of our DNA without us being aware of it, the separation and segregation of different race groups, however they came about, still remains a huge mystery, the grand population of this planet, and the continued deepening enslavement plan of action that continues to enslave humanity from the very first step and breath we took as a species on this planet until today. It is truly an immaculate deception.
Yeah, and Michael, in my own research, and of course the work that you've done, you know, we're gonna, you know, a lot of the questions that I have are gonna relate to that, and you're gonna touch on it. You know, when I look back at history over the last 5,000 years, it doesn't matter. You know, right now it just seems more like a centralized world type of government where they've aligned their forces, and each kingdom, you know, for thousands and thousands of years have always enslaved their people, whether that be a kingdom in Africa, whether that be a kingdom in Europe. They've always done that unless you were an aristocrat, correct?
Yeah, to some extent, yes. I think that there are definitely examples of indigenous people and native populations that have operated under slightly different situations and different structures. And
if you look at that time, and I know it's going where you're going, I wanted to say that it was either be a slave or enslave, and it seems like around 3,000 years ago, and a lot of the work that you relates to what you're doing, that a group of kingdoms had aligned themselves and just took over the world.
Yeah, it's definitely, it probably started as far back as about 6,000 years ago, about 4,000 BC, and it could be even further back in time. I guess, I suspect, should I say, that it goes back to the end of the flood, just after the flood, the sort of great biblical flood that we talk about some 12,000 years ago. And again, I speak very broadly in those time frames because we're not 100% sure, are we? But there are some indicators that tell us that there was a great flood. Most scholars and researchers seem to agree on this great biblical flood that ended about 12,000 years ago. I believe that it was after that event that completely and utterly annihilated this planet. And that is the beautiful evidence that I also present here from South Africa. But that evidence can also be seen in other parts of the world, and not just here in the South.
And it seems back then, after then, we have the Bible that came out, and it seems like it documents that with the Old Testament and Genesis, that we were at one time all separate races as far as whether we were, a race from planet Earth or they were alien races. But whatever happened at this time, we were separate races, then somehow we've all merged, correct?
Yeah, wow. That's an interesting question. Or a topic to discuss. The issue of races is a fascinating one because there is no consensus on where the race groups on planet Earth come from. It's just here we are. At least 5 distinctly different race groups. Where the hell did these people come from?
So there's 5 races basically that walk the planet Earth right now.
Yeah, and there are probably more. Sub races and so forth. But it seems like the race group phenomenon is a really fascinating thing to contemplate on planet Earth because just if you had to look at, for example, take China, and here you got 1 billion people or 1.4 billion people or whatever it is supposed to be today. Here they are, breeding and bringing forth offspring and little Chinese babies. At which point do those babies start to look like African people or blonde, blue-eyed Norwegian people? It's not going to happen unless
they're a different race.
Yeah, unless there's an injection of that DNA at some point in time.
In studying the Chinese, are they related to possibly the Hittites and the Sumerians? Have you studied that at all?
Well, there's definitely an overlap right across the world of every ancient culture, and you see that overlap in some of the symbols and the symbolism and the carvings that we find scattered across the world.
And the symbolism is carried on usually from the same families usually, right? So if we see a symbol today, most likely if we see it 3,000 years ago, it's that same race or family or tribe, correct? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the winged serpent or the feathered serpent is probably the most commonly described symbol in ancient times and ancient texts, from China all the way across to the Americas and throughout Asia and Europe and Africa, everywhere. Everywhere you go, the winged serpent, the feathered serpent, has got everything to do with bringing life, bringing creation, creating the beings, bringing knowledge and information, enslaving them at the same time, becoming the dictator, or if you want, but at the same time bringing medicine and knowledge of a kind that could be used to keep the people under control, not necessarily give them liberty and freedom.
Sounds like Tubal-Cain, of Freemasonry and of the Bible, the forger of weapons, the maker of fire, that brought that to earth. And, Cain, who, of course, slayed Abel, that active masculine principle. Yeah.
Now, there's an interesting thing in the Bible, and I'm just going to throw it in here because you just reminded me of it, because it says that Cain and Abel worked their lands with their iron tools, their iron implements. You go, what? Iron was only supposed to be discovered like 1500 BC, and in Africa only 2,000 years ago. So there's some very interesting statements that just don't make any sense.
Definitely
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to come back to the feathered serpent situation because, in China and Japan, it morphs and becomes a dragon with wings and so forth. So that's a kickback to the feathered serpent. We see it in the caduceus in the medical fraternity, obviously, the two snakes around the sword with wings at the top, deeply encoded with esoteric knowledge of such high intensity that most people just would not begin to believe it when you start unraveling that. And the other important thing to just put out there right now is that remember that everything carries its own energetic field and its own resonance and vibration, and symbols are no different. So symbols are like keys. They're like resonant keys and codes to unlock certain knowledge and create a resonant connection of a conduit, a channel of information. If you can tap into that resonant frequency of that particular symbol or carving or whatever it is that you're looking at, this is spectacular stuff. Once you get into the nature of reality and start dealing with that side of things, it becomes really exciting because what it does is it starts to explain what the physicists and scientists have been trying to explain for more than 100 years in quantum physics.
Yeah, symbols, they're the ancient symbols, and a lot of these have been around for thousands of years. And what a lot of listeners might not know is that, these things are built within our subconscious, and we've seen them. I'm a big believer in past lives, and that we, knowledge that we gain in this life is actually past knowledge that we relearn, and, that's part of evolving as a soul, and we'll probably get into that a little bit. I know Michael has some similar beliefs, but these symbols we've seen in past lives, and that's why they're universal, and they're carried on for thousands of years from, the Seal of Solomon to the pentagram to the inverted pentagram, which is used a lot now, and then also the Freemason symbols, which is I believe the Seal of Solomon, which is, the compass ring that they have, and you could see that on the back of the dollar bill as well. And you have the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill, and the country of the United States was founded by Freemasons, who their whole belief system is symbology and mathematics and energy. And once you start realizing this and looking into it, you start opening the Pandora's box and going down the rabbit hole. And sometimes when you look at these symbols, don't always believe the first definition that you find, because sometimes there's disinformation put out there purposely by these secret societies so that we don't find the truth, and those people that are uninitiated, that's the whole idea, is to kind of lead them away from the truth a little bit. And those that find the truth, they're worthy to find it, is the way they figure it.
Yeah.
And what's your thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree with you. But the exciting thing is that more and more people are talking about it, and more people are paying attention to it, and everyone has their own trigger point of becoming awakened and start the process of enlightenment. And doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a really wealthy individual or a poor person, on the sort of on the street, everyone has a trigger point to suddenly, something switches in your mind and you start questioning, and the existing answers that we've been force-fed for so long are no longer good enough. And but the symbols are really key. The one symbol that Zecharia Sitchin equated with Enki, the Sumerian, one of the Anunnaki that came to Earth some 500,000 years ago, or whatever it was, 450,000 years ago. The guy that started doing the gold mining here in southern Africa, and we can speak for hours and hours about that, because that's really my area of research and expertise, what I call the lost city or the lost empire of Enki, because it covers most of South Africa, well, pretty much all of Southern Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, and right across the Zambezi into Zambia as well. Probably one of the most beautiful parts of the entire planet. It's a spectacular part of the world. And this is why so many people choose to live here, I guess. and also climatically, it's just so amazing, you know. But what you find is what Zecharia Sitchin equated with Enki, the guy that set up the gold mining empire here, is the caduceus was the symbol that he associated with him, and Enki was also referred to as the medical guy, the geneticist, the guy who actually oversaw the genetic cloning and manipulation of the new species, the Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker, and Enki, until recently, was just seen to be a Sumerian figure, until I went and had a full-day meeting with Baba Credo Mutwa, South African wise man and great elder of great knowledge and consciousness. He's the highest level of shaman that you can find. He's a Sanusi shaman. And Credo Mutwa has become a global icon for exposing hidden indigenous knowledge, and many people are actually were very angry with him when he wrote his probably most important book, Indaba, My Children, in which he spills a lot of the beans that have been held sacred by the African shaman. But what Credo Mutwa told me is that Enki is also known as the created god in ancient African tradition, and he's known as Enkai, Enkai, the creator god of the human race. And you start seeing the connections. And one of the, if we can get back to the symbols, one of the most recognized, instantly recognized symbols as well is the cross in a circle, the Sumerian cross in a circle. Sometimes it has wings, like the winged disc, or sometimes it's just the cross in a circle. And that symbol you'll find all over the world. And it's fascinating when you start looking at why did people carve these crosses in circles. Until I started looking at this and my whole sort of journey of discovery here in southern Africa, with discovering these ancient vanished civilizations here of millions and millions of stone structures that lie scattered throughout southern Africa. When I started realizing that it was all connected to sound and sound frequency, and it all started to make sense, because now we start tapping into what all ancient cultures and religions talk about, where the creation of the universe and all things in it comes from a source of sound, the sound of God, or the word of God, or the Om, or the Egyptians sang the universe into creation, or the Aboriginal people talk about the supernatural beings that rose from out of the earth and created the form of the earth with 3 sacred songs. So it's all linked to sound that manifests physical form and matter and shape. And it's when you start looking at what is at the center of a sound frequency, or a source of a sound point. And to my great surprise, or I shouldn't say surprise, to my great amusement, I guess, I found that when at the center of this, what I call a pop, there seems to be this beautiful symbol shape that the sound makes of a cross in a circle, following sacred geometric principles. And
all is energy.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. So when you start seeing the crosses, the Gnostic cross, the Christian cross, all the different crosses from throughout human history, the Knights Templar cross, etc. They all have a specific reason why they drew them like that. And if you start looking at them in my presentation, I actually show you how just even the form of the cross in the middle that comes out of a little circle in the middle is just a representation of the sound frequencies that manifest form and shape and matter.
And that's why music is so important, and you've seen it a part of religion ever since the very beginning with the hymns and the chants and the so forth. It changes us, and that's what everybody needs to realize out there, that music and what we listen to and what we intake into our minds is so important, and what we surround ourselves with. From, if you're listening to hardcore heavy metal music all the time that's real hateful and angry, guess what's going to happen with you? It's going to change you. It's going to change your very structure and your DNA. into that hateful type of thing, and they know that the powers that be understand this, and you find that in rap music as well, and it gets inserted into our brains, and it changes us, and music is one of the most powerful, the human voice, the most powerful magical enchantments in the world. And that's, a thing that's related to your subject. I was thinking about the most powerful and highest paid people right now this is the two E's, I call it, either entertain or enslave.
Yeah.
And you look at that could be banking, that could be pharmaceutical, as far as the enslavement goes, anything related to that, or the big corporations. And then you look at entertain, you find that in sports, you find that in music. These guys are the highest paid because they could enchant the largest audiences.
Yeah.
And usually these people aren't the best of role models as far as spirituality goes, or truth or love. It's usually the complete opposite, and it's materialism. Do you agree?
Yeah. Now, that's very interesting what you said there, and it's very important for people to understand that and start wrapping their heads around that. Everything is resonance and frequency. So that's the source of all things, and as we mentioned earlier, we are told this by all ancient cultures, and the source creation point of all religions and all belief systems all comes from this same principle: sound resonance, some creative force that created the whole universe and everything in it, with the original, Om, or whatever you want to call it. That's really important to understand how that affects, as you mentioned, the words we speak and the words we hear, which includes the music and the frequencies, because that is everything we put out, even our thoughts, obviously, but a spoken word is even more powerful because it carries the actual resonance with it, not just the frequency of the thought, but the actual resonant effect as well. And those like, some of the great prophets told us, you can move mountains with those.
I agree, and that's why a lot of the past prophets and truth tellers were silenced. And it's interesting to me that, now that we're able to, find this knowledge, and, you talk about how we're, of course, in one of the most enslaved times in history, which I agree, and then also there's also liberation and freedom for those people that seek it within this kind of prison-like system. That's what I'm kind of finding. It's like, to me, I look at, as far as the enslavement goes, it's more of a monetary type of thing, with the banking now, where before it was pretty much with a sword and, a religion, take this religion or take the sword, kind of thing, and that was propagated, and now they've mastered it to a point of materialism and money where there's no master and a whip and a sword or a cross to get burned on now, but there's a master called money, that if you live in, a society here like in, California or America, anywhere, and then most European countries, and I'm sure it's quite similar in South Africa, you don't have money, you're on the street. So money is a type of energy as well that the powers that be also understand, and it could be used for either good or bad. So once you understand that money is almost a type of freedom, so if the more money you make, it could either enslave you with your vices and your passions if you use your money for that, or you could use the money to liberate you in this enslavement type of system. And my understanding, it's always kind of been like that, or it was like that in Egypt. You could buy your way out of slavery. I don't know if you have any research on that, but can you talk a little bit more about South Africa, the gold mining and the slavery that has happened for the past thousands of years before the banking? We get into the banking.
Yeah, well, it's really all connected, as I said right at the start. Once you start to understand what went down here 300,000 years ago with the creation and the cloning of the primitive slave species, or as the Sumerian tablets call it, the Lulu Amelu, that gives us a very clear indication of how it's evolved and what happened and how we've been enslaved and continue to be enslaved. But in essence, what we've got here and what I've been sharing with the world for the last 7 years, well, actually, it's only really the past 5 years since I've discovered the physical evidence, since sort of mid-2007, that I discovered the physical evidence of the ancient gold mining empire here. But the information and the knowledge of this golden empire goes back 500 years. It's not something new, but it's just been ignored. It's been ignored and misunderstood for 500 years. And I guess not just misunderstood and ignored, but also consciously suppressed and kept out of sight and out of mind by those who knew, like the royal bloodlines and those that actually have all the information, those that knew what was going down here for hundreds of thousands of years. They've kept this very neat and tidy and out of sight and out of mind. And that's why, in many ways, I believe that Southern Africa has always been kept very stable. There's never been really too much major, war kind of activity here. That's all North Africa and the Horn of Africa and up there, thousands and thousands of miles away from us. We don't even know that it exists. But they've had to keep this part of the world away from the sort of glaring eyes of the rest of the world, because it's the golden goose that keeps laying the golden eggs.
It's interesting because everybody thinks that Egypt is that. Was that just it came later, Egypt? They pretty much mined South Africa, or South Africa was always the place, and the Ordo ab Chao, look over here, but it's really over there.
Oh, absolutely. Remember that Egypt, obviously, the whole Egyptian story that we've been sold today is just a deception. I mean, I came back from Egypt in December completely disillusioned. I couldn't believe what I had encountered. My first trip to Egypt, and it was not what I had expected. I realized that it's like, I now call it a Disneyland of deception. These huge monuments and these giant temples and all that, but that's pretty much all you've got. Where are all the ancient cities? Where did the people live? Where are the civilizations that built all this stuff? Where are the people that built the pyramids? They're just nowhere to be found. And you realize that we're dealing with huge amounts of information that lies buried below the soil. I traveled extensively all the way from Cairo and Alexandria all the way down to Aswan, and saw many sites. And what became very clear to me is that there's an absolute cover-up going on to prevent the older and more ancient civilizations that lie down below the sand, the next layer down, from being excavated. And that's really fantastic, because we don't, unless you know what you're looking at. If you're just a tourist and you go to Egypt, you're so overwhelmed by the spectacle and the size and the temples and the stories that they tell you, and it's all part of this storyline and the fairy tales that have now grown into huge lies and deception.
Is it so? The whole story of Egypt, I mean, of course it's not all made up, but a lot of it is. Is that what you're saying? Or there was no pharaohs? Or
No. I'm just saying that the real history of Egypt lies buried below the soil. We're not seeing it.
Gotcha.
And the main example of that, there are two main reasons I say that. Is firstly, that the Assyrian temple at Abydos is a great example, where you got those huge, probably I'd say 300, 400, 500 ton blocks and pillars that make up the underground. It's just partially excavated. We don't know how much larger it is. It lies below the existing temple. It's filled with water. Clearly you can see that there's a lot more to dig out and excavate, but they've stopped. They've closed it off. There's barbed wire all around it. And that's where the flower of life is not carved, but printed with some sort of a laser technology, several flowers of life on one of the pillars. And that has been closed off. No one goes there. And strangely enough, it's now becoming one of the most sought after attractions in Egypt, because people realize that that's where the real information lies. buried beneath the soil that they don't want to excavate.
So that's something they find, and until they decide if they want to release it to the public or never release it, it's that kind of thing. It's like, oops, okay, close it off to the public. We got to do our own kind of secret government type of. Gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. Or like one of the other temples, I forget which one it is now because I visited so many, where the helicopter and the tanks or all those carvings have been exposed. Well, apparently what happened is it was covered by some plaster, and then the plaster fell off and exposed those hieroglyphs, and it sent such a shockwave through the entire Egyptological, historical department that they closed that entire temple for something like, I speak under correction, but something like 9 years or 12 years. It was closed because they didn't know what to say to the people about those hieroglyphs.
Wow.
So it just shows you. But when the other place that I went to, which very few people go to, it's not easy to get to, is the pyramid and the site at Abu Ghraib. Now that is just spectacular. When you go there, you realize that we're dealing with a civilization with ancient knowledge and technology that we know nothing about. You only start making sense of it if you start to listen to what I've been talking about, the vanished civilizations of Southern Africa, and the kinds of tools and technology that I've been collecting and putting together a story of that makes sense from a scientific evaluation. When you start realizing that they had this advanced knowledge of levitation, of laser and Caesar technology, not just laser, but specifically Caesar, which is sound amplified by stimulated emission of radiation. And that is far more effective than laser technology, because with Caesar technology you can levitate stuff, you can do all kinds of stuff that lasers cannot necessarily do. And
what do you believe happened? Do you believe that there was a big cataclysm that took everybody out, the people with this knowledge, or do you possibly believe that it was just, the different races, or possibly a new race landed on Earth, or there was this other violent race that took over this race, and the guy that had the secrets, they just cut off his head, and there went the secrets into the sand?
I think it's all of the above, But
Gotcha.
the main event that happened here, there's no doubt about that, and this is why more than 90% of more than 10 million stone ruins here in Southern Africa lie buried beneath the soil and sand, and specifically sea sand, because it was covered by the flood. It was destroyed by the biblical flood some 12,000 years ago. So since then, the shift has moved. They did reopen and reactivate some of the gold mines here in South Africa and in Zimbabwe, and this is when you start seeing the rise of the kingdom of Monomotapa, the great African golden kings they ruled the world from the perspective of gold for thousands of years. Nobody knows about them.
And that's because what usually happens when another kingdom or a tribe race takes out the other one, they pretty much wipe them out and just take over, and sometimes they just sit on the throne like nothing ever happened. Yeah,
but the Monomotapa kingdom was attacked. They were attacked by the Phoenicians, they were attacked by the Romans, they were attacked by all the great so-called northern civilizations, and they could not be conquered. And then they eventually vanished from sight for some obscure reason. But they left behind what is now at the heart of what was then the Monomotapa kingdom, was Great Zimbabwe, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, which they did not build, they inhabited.
When approximately what was that? I know you can't, there's no scientific date, but when do you think approximately?
When Great Zimbabwe was built.
I actually know when they were taken out, when they kind of vanished from civilization.
I'd say somewhere around, probably around 1600, around that period, late 1500s, 1600s.
BC?
No, AD. No, quite.
Oh, wow.
500 years ago, yeah.
Wow.
With the arrival of the Portuguese and the Spanish and then the English and the Dutch here in Southern Africa.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Mayans, kind of something similar to that. It just kind of happened around the world.
Yeah. Now you remember that the Pope divided the world up. He gave the Spaniards the Western world, and the Portuguese were given sort of Africa and Asia. So this is why the Portuguese explorers, if you want to call them that, came around the Cape of Good Hope, and the Spaniards went to the Americas.
What year was that, and what pope?
Well, that was the same time as Cortez and Columbus were invading the Americas, late 1400s, 1482, I think. Vasco da Gama, not Vasco da Gama, Bartholomew Diaz came via the Cape of Good Hope, and then Vasco da Gama. They came around the late 1800s, same time as the Spaniards were invading the Americas.
Who do you feel that the world's still split up this way? You have, of course, Europe. You have all those other lands, and you have France, and they're not Spaniards. Where do they play a role in this? You have France, and of course Europe, and the British Crown. Yeah. And then you have the Spaniards as well. Well, are they all competing groups, or are they all aligned now? Do you think?
Yeah. In the end, they all work for the same few that will make the call on this planet. You know. Do
you think that's someone on this planet, or possibly another race from a different planet, another alien race? That's what I...
Well, I think that it's an alien race that is made this planet their home. We are just the byproduct of their being here, and we're waking up to that now and realizing what's going on. And
it seems like they're allowing that, Michael.
Well, I'll tell you what I believe is happening here is that the bloodlines know that it's really a tough thing, this. You know, I've been struggling with this, and I'm sure that all other researchers that go through this phase struggle with the same sort of philosophy when you hit it, or the reality when you hit it, is how brutal and draconian can you continue to be while you under the scrutiny of other beings of high consciousness that, you know, multiple millions and millions, infinite number of beings of high consciousness around in the universe that are observing what you're doing on this planet, allowing you to continue doing what you're doing. So this is what I think happens. This is the current philosophy that I have. You can create a structure, because the prime directive, as we've learned for 50 years now from Star Trek, right? I believe the prime directive is definitely at play here and plays a critical role in everything that's going on here. And if you create a new species, you can allow them to do their own thing, and claim to be guiding them. And you can be guiding them into the gutter as long as you're not doing it against their will, as long as they think that they're following you for the right reasons. Does it make any sense?
Yeah, so basically it's almost a type of free will system, they believe.
The manipulation of your free will.
So if you're willing to go with it and take a bite of that poison apple and eat it up, or those drugs or those pharmaceutical stuff, then you're that free will is you're a victim, you're a sacrifice. Gotcha.
Yes. Now it gets interesting here, and I think this is where it gets complicated. So what these beings, call them the Anunnaki, or possibly other beings as well, but I think the Anunnaki are probably the primary instigators of this on this planet. Also the primary instigators of what went down in Atlantis. That was then corrupted by other beings and invaded by other beings. But I think that what happened here is that they created these beings, the Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker, and what most of them didn't know, the Anunnaki didn't know, is that Enki encoded the beings with a more advanced DNA, because he realized that he was not allowed to create, according to the Prime Directive, a species that would not grow in consciousness. I mean, that would be like the worst evil, if you can use that word, deed against all of creation, right? And in fact, I've got some interesting feedback from various people that have given me this information. This is why I've reached some of these conclusions, that have claimed that the Anunnaki have committed a great sin against all of creation, and for that they've been cast out of the book of life. And this is all connected to their activity on Earth, their obsession with gold, but not the shiny gold, the white powder of gold, the monoatomic gold, which is a very highly energetic substance that has very important attributes, and and was used and continues to be used by them very strategically. this stuff gets really weird. The deeper you get into it, the weirder it gets. And I know we just jumped straight into the deep end here, you know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I know a lot of the listeners and people that are interested in what you have to say, Michael, or this is what they want to hear, you know, and we need to, you know, and I'm sorry I interject sometimes because I feel that some of the questions I might have and touch on, even though I might interrupt your thought or questions people might have, like such as the Anunnaki, what planet did they allegedly come from?
Yeah, well, you know, Sitchin claims they come from Nibiru. Whether that's true or not, I remain open on that. I will definitely side with Sitchin because I do believe that he was a great scholar. He devoted his life to this subject matter. There are others that have studied the text as well that seem to agree with him. Although he's got hundreds, if not thousands, of detractors, I have no time for those people, I must tell you, because from my own research and some of the people that I've spoken to who I have the highest regard for that have worked with Sitchin have very, very honorable things to say about the man. But I just want to come back to the Anunnaki and the gold and what they did here, because it is really interesting. So you can influence a being by pretending to lead them and then take and allowing them to form what they believe is free will. So they give you things like democracy. You see, you've got freedom, you've got choice, you've got democracy. You can choose a leader, but we'll stage the leaders. We'll put them there for you to choose. So you don't really have free will. We'll set the stage. So you really make choices that have been predetermined for you, and but under the belief that you've got free will and you can, you know, do what you want. But the moment that the creature or the being shows signs of higher consciousness and starts to contemplate its own being and its own evolution into the family of beings of high consciousness that make up the universe and the multiverse, and starts to comprehend the unity consciousness principle and the source field of unity consciousness, the fact that we all actually resonate from the same source, and starts to recognize and realize these advanced bits of knowledge and information, that you've lost them. At that moment, you may no longer exercise your draconian or your potentially draconian laws and rules against that being because they've chosen a different path. Does it make sense?
It makes perfect sense, because I believe that the powers that be allow that in this society to an extent, except the monetary and the taxes. You know, that's in the Bible. You got to give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah. So I think what's happening now is that we are waking up so quickly. The enlightenment and the rise of consciousness is going exponentially around the world. And millions of people are having these kind of discussions. And millions of people are making discoveries and connecting to the Akashic records and the morphogenic field and downloading information that they know is true and they know is real because they are starting to understand how it all works and fits together. So it is no longer possible to lie to the people. You can only lie to the people that are uninformed and ignorant. So this is what the whole thing of enlightenment and awakening is all about, is the moment that humanity will reach our true liberation and freedom from the draconian oppression of those who use money as a tool of enslavement and the draconian rules that they've implemented over 6,000 years around money. Those days are now over. We are here in these times, and this is why the Mayans spoke about it, and the African cultures talk about it, and the Aboriginal people talk about it, the Native American people talk about it. You know that in 1986, some of the Hopi elders and some of the other Native American people the chiefs came to South Africa. They met with Credo Mutwa and a few other shaman and elders of Africa because they believe in their Native American cultures that the rise of the new world and the new age will come from South Africa. I mean, how bizarre is that?
It's interesting because I've never heard that until you stated that. I just heard that yesterday, and you know, I always prepare for my interview of, right before the day before, and I heard you say that in the video and again right now, and it's really interesting because no one ever thinks to look to South Africa.
Well, you've got to, and this is why I bring people back to the end days will be as the first days, and as above, so below. This is the end of the cycle. The Mayans said this is the end of an age and the beginning of another. So if the new age is rising, and we're already rising into the new age, then it has to come from the place where humanity originally came from, and that is right here in South Africa, not Zimbabwe.
Okay, Michael. What about, when I look at this, I want to play devil's advocate here as far as the world goes. When I look at, I agree with you, people are waking up more than ever, and people are being led to the light and the truth, and it's being hard to control them. But I also look at the other side of the spectrum, that I feel personally that 99% of society is still asleep, that still could be lied to, and they love the lies, and they love the materialism, and they love it being abused. And a lot of them I've tried to talk to and educate, and some of them are my own family and my wife. It's not my wife, excuse me, my wife's family. My wife is my partner in truth and light as well, but as far as her family goes, you try to educate them on different things, vaccines and truth and history. It goes right over their head. And then my family, it's a waste of breath. And then friends, we don't have too many friends because they're more interested in the materialism and in the Facebook, BS. Instead of educating someone with their Facebook account, they want to talk about their meal and how good they look and the hair they got and just change their Facebook page. That's who we're dealing with. What's going to happen? My thoughts are that I agree that people like yourself and myself are going to help lead society in the future, and that actually the powers that be had wanted it to be like this, and that eventually, you see the materialist and the people losing their homes. It's almost like they're using that money to kind of take out that class. Even though they don't know it, they're slowly pulling out the cork on the boat, or they're turning up the heat on the water and the frogs in the pot. They're all losing their homes, their jobs, and we're creating jobs, and this is going on. And I looking at it, running my website loansafe.org, and seeing behind the scenes and what's really going on, it's all BS. And then you see the plans of the future with Agenda 21 here in America, where it's pretty much they sliced up the country to where we're only living in zones, and the rest of the country is almost like green zones. It's almost like this is all going towards that agenda, and they're pulling the plug out on materialism to an extent.
Yeah. Look, you can only push people so far. I think that what happened in Cyprus with the banks closing was a test to see how far they can push people with, closing their accounts and just robbing their accounts and just pure, it's just pure theft. In global headlines, and they wanted to see what the people would do. Well, they could see that the people do nothing. So that was not a good omen. But it did make people around the world realize exactly that the banks have the ability just to close your account and keep all your money, and nobody's going to accuse them of theft.
Well, they did that here in America with the bailouts, because, like I had mentioned, I run my website, loansafe.org, which pretty much deals with mortgages, and we were keeping track of all the bailouts and the alleged attorney general settlements with the banks. Nothing ever materialized. They go on before they go to Congress and get the money that, hey, we're going to use this money to, bail out homeowners and so forth. And then, Bernanke comes on and he's being interviewed by the Senate. Hey, we gave it to banks. Can you tell us who that was? No, we're not going to tell you. What about the homeowners? Sorry. That's basically what it was. And I'm helping these exact same people that seen this happen, and no one does nothing. And they keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And Americans are a bunch of wimps for the most part. They don't do shit. And I've seen this go on, and it's just like, well, you tell them the truth and you try to even educate them, these people that are losing their home, and that's one of the worst time to try to give them the light and the truth is that time. All they want to do is save their home and their material possessions. So it's this weird dichotomy of how the system's set up.
But I think, while this is happening and while they're tightening the screws and the heat's going up in everybody's life, they start to realize and feel that something is wrong. And it's at that moment and at that point that they are more open to possibly receive a message or a word or a sentence or an image or something from somewhere that will be their trigger point. And that could happen so quickly that, I don't think we should ever underestimate the power of the millions of people that are doing what you and I are doing and talking about what you and I are talking about now. There are millions and millions of people around the world that are doing the same. And the energy flows out. That resonant frequency flows out, whether the people hear it or not. It is affecting them. That's just the simple reality.
And the powers that be know this because they're allowing us to do this as well. Do you agree, Michael? Meaning that if you get that and you get what I'm saying and get what Michael's saying and you might be in that dark spot and you get that spark of light from us or truth that helps you, that they're okay with that and you could not be controlled by them as much, and they're okay with that. And the guy that doesn't get it, they're okay with that too.
Yeah,
more so.
This is exactly where I see that split. So you can carry on controlling the people that live in the darkness, and you'll continue controlling them until they see the light, right? And then you stop controlling them.
It seems like the secret societies have allowed the light for us to, because when you go, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, in finding you, Michael, and getting educated on what you've done, and of course, thousands of people, every video I see and every talk that you do gets 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 views, and I mean, there's probably hundreds of videos of you on YouTube talking about this, and you're not being silenced, you're not being taken out, you're being allowed to enlighten people. So I feel like it's the catch-22, the order abkeo kind of thing being played on the people.
Yeah.
That we're allowed to be enlightened as long as not too much of us get enlightened, and as long as they could keep their control on society. But do you think that the end goal is complete and total enslavement hell, or it's eventually wipe out those people that don't get it, they wipe themselves out, and we eventually have a more free type society that you and I dream of, and we're sovereign and we don't need the law to govern us through the day? And when I study Freemasonry and the secret societies, they all talk about that day, of that coming, and that plan of that new world order that some people hate is actually could be a good thing, or it could be the exact opposite, which you see on the internet, which is completely total control, annihilation of the human being, where we're nothing anymore. What do you see it happening in the end result?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I've contemplated that as well, because in some sense a new world order could be a utopian world, utopian life. But it has to follow certain principles. Now, this is why I believe that my new book that I've spent the last 8 years formulating, since basically 2005, which I originally called Contributionism, a blueprint for a new social structure, a world without money, which is now, the book is going to be called Ubuntu Contributionism, a world without money. Because all ancient cultures had very similar systems. They varied slightly, but they all came down to the same basic principles, that you don't need to be governed, that communities can look after themselves, and the moment you remove money from the system, you open up the doors to innovation and to unlimited and unbridled invention and abundance. That's the most important thing. We live on a planet of abundance, and we are constantly bombarded with scarcity. But that's part of the plan. So to come back to your statement of the control of the unenlightened and the leaving those that are enlightened alone, that is, I believe, where those who are trying to keep control of this planet are doing everything they can, because the only way they can keep control of this planet is by the people choosing to stay under the control, and that they're doing through fear-mongering and fear tactics. So the people that you mentioned earlier that are still worried about their cars and their homes and what they're going to lose, that's all just fear. It's got nothing to do with enlightenment and seeing the light, so it's all fear-driven. People are scared because they don't really know what's going on. Once you realize that this life is an experience, and it's really a projected reality, if you want to call it that. It's like a movie. You know, we're a conglomeration of light particles. We coagulated light that is manifested in physical form, that is consciousness imbued into the body and the form, that is suddenly find ourselves on this beautiful planet that for some reason that we're coming to terms with now has been abused and manipulated by a group of these beings. And we're now realizing that this abuse has been happening, and we're choosing to move away from that. So you can't stop that, because that's when you do that, you're contravening what I said earlier, the prime directive. And boy, has Star Trek been right on most of the things that they've been teaching us for so many decades now. You know, it's been spectacular. It's been like an education. And
I just noticed that recently too myself.
Everything you've ever seen on Star Trek has been absolutely spot on, accurate and true. Now, let me get back to what you said there. They're actually educating us. They being those who are trying to pull the strings and keep the control. So, those that have fallen in love with the physical form, with the human form and physical perfection and immortality, that want to retain this planet as that kind of playground for themselves, can only do so by continuing the draconian abuse of humanity. Now, those that are waking up are being fed from all kinds of sources, and the Hollywood movies are actually very important in feeding us with subconscious, high consciousness information, which you will find a lot more information on my good friend Willem de Swart here in Johannesburg, South Africa, that is probably the leading authority on what I call the secret numbers of God and the decoding of the secret messages in movies and in literature, but specifically in Hollywood blockbuster movies. And if you just start looking at the origin of Hollywood, the name Hollywood, the fact that, you know, the wood of a holly tree was used by wizards to cast spells, and they chose the name Hollywood for this place, that they were going to make movies and create projected realities that project on a silver screen filled with what? Filled with stars. And you start seeing the nomenclature and so the language that was created around Hollywood, and the fact that it's a blockbuster movie. Well, what does a blockbuster movie do? It busts the mental block of enslavement, because it's encoded with deep-seated messages and information that people do not see on the surface, but is very subconscious. Boy, please go on to secretnumbers.org and start studying Willem de Swart's work. And
that was fascinating.
It'll blow your mind. And this was confirmed to me, incidentally. I had dinner with Jordan Maxwell on my last trip to the USA. And I ended up talking to Jordan the whole night. My girlfriend Louise and I and Jordan just told us his whole life story and everything. And I asked him about exactly this. And he confirmed that this is exactly what's happening. And he suggested to me that it is the innermost sanctum group of the Freemasons that are actually still the original Knights Templar, that are the highest, most secretive part of the Freemasons. Most of the Freemasons don't even know they exist. And they have taken control of Hollywood, the movies, and they encode them with this knowledge and information. And once you see how spectacular this information is encoded, because it's all connected to the tarot cards and the understanding and the information encoded specifically in the 22 major arcana tarot cards, it is the absolute knowledge of everything we know about existence and the universe that's encoded in those cards. It is spectacular. I tell you, Mo, Willem de Swart has just opened up a body of knowledge and information that will blow everybody's mind.
Yeah, this the tarot is something actually I just started studying recently, and one of the things I do to learn actually is I'll write an article on something for my blog. It's something I've been doing lately. So if I find something interesting or I want to write on, and I usually write on several different subjects, I kind of, just start writing about it and studying it, and then I, do a little article on it. But I wrote about the Hanged Man, and that's the card number 12, which is the 12th trump. And it's interesting, Alpheus Levi said in his book, Transcendental Magic, and, Alpheus Levi is a great person to study. He has several books that I have, but if you want to know what's going on, you could definitely check out his work. Says it also implied fantastically that the Roman alphabet is related to tarot cards, but whereas the Hebrew man answers the card of death, the Roman M is referred to the hangman, Resh, the judgment card, but R to the blazing star. And it says Levi likens the hangman to the legend of Prometheus, the titan who gave fire to mankind, in turn suffered the wrath of Zeus to become the eternal sufferer by being bound to a rock to have his liver to be eaten by an eagle each day. And it's interesting, and then I just was studying, the inverted pentagram the month before, and it just kind of reminded me of that, and the inverted pentagram is the symbol of the Church of Satan and Satanist, of course. And when you study that, you study, of course, the regular pentagram, which is the upright pentagram, and that is the symbol of man with his five senses upright. And the inverted pentagram is the opposite. Your five senses are turned upside down, kind of thing. So there's a lot of symbolism in these cards, definitely, and the powers that be understand that. And I definitely believe the movies. That secretnumbers.org I definitely want to check out, because I just watched a movie called I forget what it was called, The Killing Numbers or whatever, but it was a show about these little zones. It was about America, and everybody was in zones, and all electronics, everything was gone, and we were living in camps that looked like Agenda 21, but they were all surrounded by barbed wire, and the only free zones were all green zones, and we all lived in these different zones, and pretty much everybody was gone except the like a few million people or whatever, and it reminded me of the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah. Well, you see, what I also want to just caution people against is to continuously go down this rabbit hole of negative information, because remember, we're the creators of our own reality, and we keep forgetting that, and we keep getting sucked through fear and negative influence and television and media, sucked into the negative vortex, or the spiral vortex, into the opposite, the negation of where we should be going. And you'll find Willem de Swart talks about it's not positive and negative, but it's the creation and the negation as the opposites of each other, rather than positive and negative. Because that would suggest that that God is capable of creating something nasty and mean and negative, which clearly that cannot be the case, because it's just ultimate creation of love. Love is the frequency of creation. So there's some very interesting and important things that we need to embrace and really think about. But so I want to just caution people not to go down that rabbit hole of negative thought, and rather start thinking about what I've been focusing my mind on, and that is the utopian future that we are creating for ourselves, and we need to start visualizing and imagining and projecting for ourselves the utopian world of abundance on all levels, where all humans are absolutely free because we've chosen that freedom and taken it for ourselves and given it to ourselves, where we choose what communities of infinitely conscious people we live in, where money does not make any part or form any part of our reality, where contributionism is whatever the word that I came up with, that ancient cultures called Ubuntu, where everybody contributes their God-given talents and their acquired skills and passion for the greater benefit of everyone else in their community, which leads to only one thing: abundance on all levels beyond our wildest belief. That is what I would like everybody to occupy their minds with, and start projecting that kind of world and that kind of planet for ourselves. And let's wipe away any negative thoughts, any negative impressions or hang-ups from the past that might still be clouding our thoughts today. Let's get rid of all of that and only start projecting this utopian planet. That's the way I'd like to move on from here.
I agree, Michael, and it's important. I want to touch on the fear aspect, because a lot of people, I was guilty myself when I first got into the truth and knowledge path, that I turned in and tuned into a lot of websites, forums, and blogs that were more fear. Every day was kind of just like that fear porn. It was almost like the worst of the articles that you would find in the newspapers they would be propagating, and the worst of the conspiracies every day, and there was no love, there was no truth, there was no hope. Yeah. And what I realized after a while, I was starting to get real hateful and fearful, and it wasn't good. And it wasn't until I started, like you had said, focusing, even though we still go down this rabbit hole of knowledge, and there's some ugly things there that we find, and we use that and we educate them, and you write books, The Slave Species of God. It doesn't mean that Michael's just focusing on the negative. No, he's educating people, but your focus is, of course, on that positive. And by being involved in the truth movement with what you're doing right now, and even when we sometimes talk about the negative and the slavery and money and all that stuff, is we want to educate you, but also to always keep positive, because we're allowed to talk about that, and do you think, Michael, that we can lead this society to that utopian heaven on earth, possibly, and the powers that be could still have their power, and they would allow it, even though, of course, they want their power? They're always going. See, my belief is they're always going to be power guys in charge, whether that be a king, whether that be these high Templars or Illuminati, whoever you want to call them, are always going to be there. But can they have that power and have a population and citizens like ourselves that don't need a million laws to govern us, where we could govern ourselves and they could still have their power and they could walk around freely as well? Well,
this is the question is not can we get there. The question is we are going there. We are getting there. We are on an irreversible course, on a direction towards a utopian planet, a world of higher consciousness. There's no doubt about that. We've crossed that galactic plane. We've crossed the horizon. We've moved through the possible, falling down into the abyss, or whatever you want to call it. The consciousness has saved this planet, and people don't necessarily realize that, but I want them to think about this. We are moving towards a utopian world. There's no doubt about that. And there's no place for anyone to have any control. It's not possible. This is why I'm going to punt my book now, because it's critical that people get this information in a structured chronological order, so that they understand where we've come from, what is going on, and where we're going. And we already are at the doorstep of where we're going. All we need to do is just move through the door and start to inhabit that new utopian planet that we are imagining and visualizing for ourselves. We're right on the threshold of it. And
is it always darkest before the dawn?
Absolutely. That's what it seems to be. So don't be fearful. Lose your fear. Drop your fear and realize we are on the threshold of the utopian world. There is no place for money or the controllers of money or those that create a hierarchical structure, or kings or lords or any one of these. We are all born equal. We are all fractals of the infinite divine creative source. Okay? It doesn't matter who you are. Everything is a fractal of the divine creation.
What if someone that's in power doesn't agree with that? You see, presidents that have came in and tried to change the system and had, tried to smash the Federal Reserve, and we're just little guys compared to, say, John Kennedy.
That was all in the past. That was all stuff that happened when there was not enough knowledge, information, and consciousness, and there was no internet. So today, information can spread very quickly, and that actually helps and aids the spread of consciousness and information and knowledge that allows people to very rapidly change their mind about something, or possibly reach their own trigger point. It's not possible, and this is why you've got to get hold of my book, Ubuntu Contributionism, to understand why it's not possible for anyone to have control. Like you're suggesting, what if those they don't want it, won't allow it? It's not up to them. It's up to the people. In the end, it's always up to the people. It always has been and always will be. And people will rise and they'll create revolutions and all that. I believe this is not a revolution of blood and violence. It's a revolution of consciousness. the silent revolution of shifting away from the direction that we're on, getting onto a different path completely, different path of consciousness, and completely just eroding away, dissolving away the draconian past that has caused so much, destruction and so much sorrow and desperation throughout so many thousands of years.
What about the people that love this system and that they almost seem like they're on the completely other side of the spectrum, and if we were to try to do this, they would kill us, like in the past.
Well,
I'm saying our own people, our own citizens out there that love their slavery and they love their materialism.
Well, they don't really love it. They do it out of fear and necessity. They think they love it. The moment they realize that they could do what they want, all these people that you're mentioning, what you're actually doing now, Mo, you're asking one of the 12 most frequently asked questions that I actually answer in my book. And it's spectacular. What you'll see, it'll put a real smile on your face, because it is the same set of questions that everybody asks. What does that point to? It shows us that we're all equally brainwashed, and we all believe the same crap.
Yeah, the problem, I always play devil's advocate, because I've been trying to enlighten, people on my forum, loansafe.org, about banking and everything. They don't even want to have it. They don't even want to hear it, and they're losing everything. So they're in that fear aspect, and they're losing everything. And that's what I see happening across the world, or at least here in America. And I don't see enlightenment happening, only on a small percentage. And I there's hope. I believe that it's expanding, but I feel almost like those people are the enemy to us of enlightenment and truth and so forth. And I know they're under mind control as well, but some of them, do you think that everybody, if they had the chance, would choose what we choose? Or
there's not a shadow of doubt in my mind. And again, it's taken me 8 years and 310 pages of a book to compile this, to explain why I can say so and why I feel so strongly about saying so.
I need to get that book.
Yeah, it is so obvious. Once you see the light, once you understand how the control of money and those that control money has created all these false belief systems and the control systems and the legal systems and the oppression systems and the segregation and the separation, everything that's negative and bad for humanity has been set up by those who control the flow of money. And this has been going on for 6,000 years at least. And the moment you get rid of that, you realize how everything changes.
But the only devil's advocate again there would be that before there was the control of money, it seems like even during it, until there was complete control over the last few thousand years, they've perfected it now. But prior to the last couple hundred years, it was almost like anarchy to a certain extent. They had the trade and so forth, and you had, of course, the Vatican and the different European powers and the Spanish powers in France and so forth. But they were always fighting one another throughout that time, and then certain powers came to be, and they used money, of course, and perfected it over time to the electronic thing. But before it was anarchy, and now they create the anarchy when they want to. It seems like they're hell bent on using this system to control us. And go ahead.
No, I was just saying that it's all the same. It's all the same control. It's just different tools, different methodology of controlling people. But it's always divide and conquer. Remember, divide and conquer. And these people that have been doing this, or these beings that have been doing this for so many thousands of years, they're masters at it. Remember that to them, it's it's very difficult to explain, because it just comes naturally to them. They know exactly what to do, how to control other beings. That's what they've been doing for probably millions of years throughout the universe, not just on this planet, but many, many other planets.
And I look at America, it was set up this way. We'll leave here shortly. I want to leave this as the last couple minutes here, is that we were set up kind of to be that way, to be that mind-controlled kind of nation to an extent, but also have the knowledge and to be led to the belief that we're free when we're not.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of like America's police force as well, where people don't understand what's going on, and of course a lot of people join the military and so forth. But it seems like the whole creation of our country is set on unifying the world in the New World Order, and that they're of course we're one of the most powerful countries in the world, if not the most powerful, along with the G8 and the G20, that they're all hell bent on creating this one world government.
Yeah, it's time is over though, because the people are just waking up so quickly now. It's, as many people are now calling it, the powers that were, and they're doing everything they possibly can to. This is why it feels so intense, because the fear-mongering and the fear tactics are just getting so overwhelming that no matter where you look in the media today, that's all you see is fear-mongering. Fear tactics being shoved in our face. So my message to your listeners is, be aware of that. Don't fall their tricks and their trickery. Understand what it is. View the news to inform yourself about how desperate they are to try and keep us under control. See it from a humoristic perspective. See it as the activities of people that are desperate, to clinging onto power, clinging to control because they know they're losing their grip. And unfortunately, it's too late. The consciousness is exploding. The people are waking up. And very, very soon. And the trigger point is going to be, quite frankly, and maybe this is a good place to leave this conversation, is when the first person releases to the population of the world a free energy device that everyone can make in their home, in their garage, or they can make it in the local community workshop, and it runs your house or a couple of houses, and everything you've got, free energy, perpetual motion, magnetic energy that creates electromagnetic energy, something like John Searle has created, and I've worked quite a bit with John Searle in the last few weeks, so I know a lot more about it than I ever did before. I believe that we're weeks, if not months, away from somebody giving the world a free energy device, put it on the internet. There are no patents, nothing. Make it free to everybody. That is the death knell to those that think they run this planet.
Yeah, and that's always been a way to control the people. That's a great way to end it, and I want to definitely talk to you in the coming months. Are you coming to America? Are you going to be touring here, Michael?
I hope so. I hope to come to the States. It all depends what happens in my tour to Europe and the UK again later this year, but I might be in America in August, in which case I'll try and do a few talks. And I haven't done San Diego, so maybe I'll come to San Diego and do something that you can help me get the word out on.
Yeah, that would be great, and I'm definitely networking with people down here now that we could probably have a good convention, and it's a major population center and truther center as well, so it might be a great idea. And the best website to find you would be michaeltellinger.com.
That's it, michaeltellinger.com. Enslaved now than at any other time in human history. Now, that might not make sense to people that are new to the subject matter. But once you get a hold of my new book, the Ubuntu Contributionism book that I've just completed, I'm just doing the third or fourth edit now. It should be out hopefully by the end of April or during May. We are more enslaved now than ever before, because the slavery is so carefully crafted and maliciously manipulated around us that we don't realize it. And it's that awakening that really gets a lot of people off their backside and start becoming activists for true liberation of humanity, the true liberation of our consciousness, and true liberation of living, breathing human beings from the draconian enslavement of every government on this planet that enslave their people in ways that they cannot even begin to imagine. And the most important tool of enslavement, which we're going to come back to later, I guess, or in another program, is money. Money is the primary tool of enslavement on our planet today. And I know that I might be jumping around because we're supposed to be talking about origins of humankind and ancient civilizations, but unfortunately, and very excitingly as well, this is how beautiful this storyline is. It takes us from the origins of humankind, genetic manipulation, slaves in gold mines in southern Africa 300,000 years ago, the evolution of our DNA without us being aware of it, the separation and segregation of different race groups, however they came about, still remains a huge mystery, the grand population of this planet, and the continued deepening enslavement plan of action that continues to enslave humanity from the very first step and breath we took as a species on this planet until today. It is truly an immaculate deception.
Yeah, and Michael, in my own research, and of course the work that you've done, we're gonna a lot of the questions that I have are gonna relate to that, and you're gonna touch on it. When I look back at history over the last 5,000 years, it doesn't matter. Right now it just seems more like a centralized world type of government where they've aligned their forces, and each kingdom, for thousands and thousands of years have always enslaved their people, whether that be a kingdom in Africa, whether that be a kingdom in Europe. They've always done that unless you were an aristocrat, correct?
Yeah, to some extent, yes. I think that there are definitely examples of indigenous people and native populations that have operated under slightly different situations, not right with the story that we're being told about humanity, our origins, the genetic code, how it all fits together. And it was also at that time, at the age of 18, that I read Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. And that was really the trigger point for me, I guess, at the age of 18. Although
so that was when you started getting interested in truth and stuff like that, looking behind the curtain?
Yeah, so it was about 1978,
okay.
78, 79. And that was, once you go through that door, there's no stopping, no turning back, as you know.
I agree, yes.
And it's a beautiful journey with stops and starts. Sometimes you get distracted. I got involved in the music industry and stage and TV and recording albums and so forth. And eventually I ended up living in Los Angeles for a year, trying to get into the music business there. I did very well until they found out that my partner and I were two white South African boys, at which stage all the record companies that had shown interest in us had dropped us like hot potatoes.
Wow.
Because it was just at
That's
that
not
stage,
too marketable, huh?
Yeah, no, that was just an interesting twist of fate, because while I was in LA trying to get signed and getting all the attention, and then suddenly being dropped, some of my black South African musician friends were in LA getting wine and dined by the big record labels because they were black, and because we were white, we were dropped. And there was an interesting reversal of fortune, although I obviously come from a background of, I guess, radical alternative thinking and always going against the thread. So I was always up against the apartheid regime throughout my childhood, and always an activist for human rights and so forth. So it's been with me for years and years and years.
Yeah, and that's, a lot of people, when they hear the word, slave, they immediately think, the black, the Africans and so forth, and it's not that. I know in researching it myself and the subject, and then my own DNA and going back over the last 3,000 to 5,000 years, is we've all been subjects to slavery and these atrocities and so forth. All the races across the world have been enslaved, and it's a lot of people, they hear that word and they think that when they're not educated on that. Do you agree, Michael, sometimes?
Well, not only that, I don't only agree with you, but I must make a very strong statement here, and I really wish and I hope that people take this and go and think about this and research this. And this is what I will tell you and your listeners. We are more in DNA at some point in time.
In studying the the Chinese, are they related to possibly the Hittites and the Sumerians? Have you studied that at all?
Well, there's definitely an overlap right across the world of every ancient culture, and you see that overlap in some of the symbols and the symbolism and the carvings that we find scattered across the world.
And this symbolism is carried on usually from the same families usually, right? So if we see a symbol today, most likely if we see it 3,000 years ago, it's that same race or family or tribe, correct? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the winged serpent or the feathered serpent is probably the most commonly described symbol in ancient times and ancient texts, from China all the way across to the Americas and throughout Asia and Europe and Africa, everywhere. Everywhere you go, the winged serpent, the feathered serpent, has got everything to do with bringing life, bringing creation, creating the beings, bringing knowledge and information, enslaving them at the same time, becoming the dictator, or if you want, but at the same time bringing medicine and knowledge of a kind that could be used to keep the people under control, not necessarily give them liberty and freedom.
Sounds like Tubal-Cain, of Freemasonry and of the Bible, the forger of weapons, the maker of fire, that brought that to earth. And, Cain, who, of course, slayed Abel, that active masculine principle.
Yeah. Now, there's an interesting thing in the Bible, and I'm just going to throw it in here because you just reminded me of it, because it says that Cain and Abel worked their lands with their iron tools, their iron implements. You go, what? Iron was only supposed to be discovered like 1500 BC, and in Africa only 2,000 years ago. So there's some very interesting statements that just don't make any sense. I just want to come back to the feathered serpent situation, because in China and Japan it morphs and becomes a dragon with wings and so forth. So that's a kickback to the feathered serpent. We see it in the caduceus in the medical fraternity, obviously, the two snakes around the sword with wings at the top, deeply encoded with esoteric knowledge of such high intensity that most people just would not begin to believe it when you start unraveling that. And the other important thing to just put out there right now is that remember that everything carries its own energetic field and different structures. And
if you look at that time, and I know it's going where you're going, I wanted to say that it was either be a slave or enslave, and it seems like around 3,000 years ago, and a lot of the work that you relates to what you're doing, that a group of kingdoms had aligned themselves and just took over the world.
Yeah, it's definitely, it probably started as far back as about 6,000 years ago, about 4,000 BC, and it could be even further back in time. I guess, I suspect, should I say, that it goes back to the end of the flood, just after the flood, the sort of great biblical flood that we talk about some 12,000 years ago. And again, I speak very broadly in those time frames because we're not 100% sure, are we? But there are some indicators that tell us that there was a great flood. Most scholars and researchers seem to agree on this great biblical flood that ended about 12,000 years ago. I believe that it was after that event that completely and utterly annihilated this planet. And that is the beautiful evidence that I also present here from South Africa. But that evidence can also be seen in other parts of the world, and not just here in the South.
And it seems back then, after then, we have the Bible that came out, and it seems like it documents that with the Old Testament and Genesis, that we were at one time all separate races as far as whether we were, a race from planet Earth or they were alien races. But whatever happened at this time, we were separate races, then somehow we've all merged, correct?
Yeah, wow. That's an interesting question, or a topic to discuss. The issue of races is a fascinating one because there is no consensus on where the race groups on planet Earth come from. It's just here we are. At least 5 distinctly different race groups. Where the hell did these people come from?
So there's 5 races basically that walk the planet Earth right now.
Yeah, and there are probably more, sub races and so forth. But it seems like the race group phenomenon is a really fascinating thing to contemplate on planet Earth because just if you had to look at, for example, take China, and here you got 1 billion people or 1.4 billion people or whatever it is supposed to be today. Here they are, breeding and bringing forth offspring and little Chinese babies. At which point do those babies start to look like African people or blonde, blue-eyed Norwegian people? It's not going to happen unless
they're a different race.
Yeah, unless there's an injection of that DNA. I was actually born in Europe. I was born in the Czech Republic and into a musical family. My mother was an opera singer. And then after the Russian invasion in 1968, my parents fled the country and settled in South Africa, mainly because of the gold mining here. My father was a miner. He was a senior mine manager in one of the mines in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, and he wanted to come to South Africa because of the mining. So that's how I ended up here. But I grew up on the mine fields in South Africa, the gold mine fields, and not really realizing how that would affect and influence my perception and thinking about the world around us. Because what I didn't know growing up in the mine fields and the gold mines was that the circumstances that prevailed during the 60s and 70s and sort of into the mid-80s on the gold mines in South Africa, actually probably from the 50s already, were probably very similar to, in many ways, to the situation that must have prevailed in the ancient gold mines of the vanished civilizations of Southern Africa. But I'll come back to that later.
It's ironic because that's the work you're doing now.
As crazy as it may sound to some people, it's incredible the similarities that you start finding. So I left school. I was always involved in music and the arts and culture and so forth. Always outside the box, but enjoyed school. I was never a loner or an outsider. Very much a game player. I played sports. I participated in all the things, and school came easy to me. I passed with great ease. I didn't have to do any work. I'd always pass exams with good marks and distinctions, and so I was fortunate in that sense. And then I left school. I went to university, and I started studying chemical engineering. Which I didn't really enjoy, not because of the subject matter, because of the lecturers. The lecturers were just sucked at this university that I was at, and I switched from chemical engineering to pharmaceutics, from Pretoria to Johannesburg, and that was an interesting shift. That taught me about pharmaceutics, how drugs are manufactured. Pretty much do the same subjects at medical school that everyone that studies medicine and dentistry does. You all do the same subjects for the first 3 years, and then it starts to specialize into more specialist subjects of the various platforms or choices. So I realized at that stage that something was quite